Welcome. Thank you for joining today's CEO Roundtable. We will begin shortly. In the meantime, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and organization and where you're calling in from. A few technical aspects and reminders before we get started. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat or email our council staff and we'll be happy to assist you. The live transcript is available at the bottom of your screen, the option to show subtitles or a live automated transcript. And as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and you'll have the opportunity to re-watch anything that you might have missed alongside the resources that will be shared. So thank you for joining us for today's CEO Roundtable. We're grateful that you have joined us for this important conversation. I will now turn the conversation over to Jennifer Flannery Anderson, our moderator for today's event.
Hi, good morning and afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you, and I'm so pleased that CEONet and the Council on Foundations could partner together and have a really great peer learning opportunity for us. We are going to focus on one of the most pressing needs I think we're all facing across the country, and that is housing. Housing that's accessible and affordable for everyone. We recognize this is a critical part of providing a safe, affordable environment, and stable housing really brings vibrancy to communities, and it's very important to empowering individuals, families, and all of our communities to thrive. So it's a key issue. I think we're all dealing with it in different ways. And I'm so pleased that we have 4 amazing panelists with wonderful expertise to share interesting perspectives. So I want to introduce you to Eileen Connolly Kiesler. She's president and CEO of the Community Foundation of Collier County here in Florida. Chris Huber, who is the CEO of the Black Hills Area Community Foundation, which is located in western South Dakota. Phil Koch is Vice President of Policy and Community Impact at the Pittsburgh Foundation, and Nicole White Forrest is Executive Director of the San Diego Housing Fund. So I'm going to let each one give opening comments and tell you a little bit about their focus on this particular topic. So we'll start with Eileen.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So happy to be here. Housing has been a huge issue in Collier County. I'm in Naples, Florida. And for us, it started with the needs assessment, the data from the community in 2017, and then a second study that was done in 2022. Housing, #1 issue in Collier County. You'll be interested to know that we have had an 88% in housing costs in the last 2 years. And rents have gone up over 50% in the last 2 years here in Collier County. And the average home sale, $700,000. So just to kind of give you a feel. Jennifer, you don't want us to go into each of the things at this point?
No, just a quick, to give kind of focus on your perspective coming into this call.
So our perspective was we started down one path and are doing some things, and it has led us down a few other roads here on what we've had to do. And so I think being flexible and being able to adjust to what each community needs and ideas that have come up across the nation in other community foundations and here in Collier is really what has set us down the path that we're going to talk about what we're doing.
Terrific. Okay, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Yeah, good morning here in Western South Dakota, Black Hills Area Community Foundation. We're based in Rapid City, about 20 minutes from Mount Rushmore, to give kind of a sense of place. We got started as an organization in housing with a convening in 2017. We hosted a housing summit. We did a number of different studies and housing summits over the next about 5 or 6 years, and came up with the idea of an impact investing fund. So we give low interest loans for development for affordable housing. This is a space that we've been working in for a number of years, and we continue to see as just a huge need. South Dakota in 2022 was the #1 rent increase year over year in the nation. And so we saw this huge explosion during COVID to our area, and really needed to work with the community to help find some solutions.
Great, thank you, Chris. And I think Chris will bring interesting perspective. They've just gotten federal funding for their project, so we'll be able to hear the challenges and opportunities that come with that. So next, I want to introduce Phil to you.
Hi, good to be here with you all. Phil Koch, Vice President of Policy and Community Impact at the Pittsburgh Foundation. The Pittsburgh Foundation went through a strategic plan about a year and a half, started about 2 years ago. And one of the things that came out of that plan was the idea of establishing a primary impact area amongst our work. And it was very clear as we looked at our data that that primary impact area needed to be in housing. We also think about our work with our people in our community, really centering it in the context of from surviving to thriving. And so when we orient our housing work, we think about that in sort of 3 bucket areas. We think about it in terms of renter protection and homelessness. We think about it in terms of affordable housing and supportive services. And then finally, we think about that as home ownership. But we also think about that particularly in terms of home ownership for Black families, because our strategic plan roots us in racial justice. As we got into that work, I would say we started where we felt we knew we had some chops. So we've been focusing on convening and public policy, as well as research. So focusing there for now, as we lean a little bit further into our plan, we'll develop other tools as well.
Great. Thank you, Phil. And finally, Nicole White-Forrest.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, my time. Good afternoon to everybody else. So the San Diego Foundation is started in traditional impact areas about 50 years ago, children and families, seniors, the environment, and all of our stakeholders started coming back to us in recent years saying all of the contributions, the grants, they're wonderful, but our constituents, the people we serve, really don't have the basic needs. They don't have stable, accessible housing. And if you don't have that as a foundational issue, our foundation, it's hard to benefit from all of the other good work that we're doing. So we started actually with a Black homeownership, home buyers assistance program. And it was wonderful in the beginning, really able to deploy some great resources. And then people ran out of homes to buy that were affordable. So the assistance was there, but the housing stock wasn't, especially in the price range for first-time home buyers. So our Policy and Innovation Center started doing housing research and said, really, we need to focus on housing production, increasing the overall supply at all income levels, low, middle, and indeed market as well. So we launched the Housing Investment Fund about 6 months ago. That is focused primarily on equity investments and mixed income housing, so new developments in San Diego County.
Perfect. All right. So you guys, we have a lot to get through. I think that we're going to go to the wire right to 1 o'clock today. If we have time for question and answer, we'll do it. But if not, let's use the Philanthropy Exchange for follow-up questions. And we also are recording this, so we'll be able to share that with you today. We are definitely going to be diving into some innovative strategies. We'll share some insights on these complex challenges, and we'll be able to talk about affordability, accessibility, and sustainability regarding housing. And I think specifically the role community foundations play, what is our unique value, and how can we make a difference on this critical issue. So I'm going to begin by posing some questions to our panelists, and then we'll keep going. We have a lot of topics. So first of all, talking about how this project, your projects came to exist, and what was the initial funding? How did you get started? What was the impetus? And what was either the dollar amount that you started with or the original project that you started with? Sometimes it's dollars, sometimes it's a housing project. So let us know, and we'll start with Eileen.
Yeah, so our first project out of the chute was a public-private partnership with the county of Collier County and a private developer and the community foundation. So what we knew at the time is we were short about 10,000 units for workforce. We knew that 52,000 people drive in and out of this community every single day for work. So from that, it led us to, let's start a public-private partnership. Let's get the county to give us land. Let's hire a nonprofit developer, and let's put $10 million at the table that the community foundation raised to help offset costs. And we created project for 250 units for essential employees only. So police, teachers, nurses, EMT, firefighters. That's who we're trying to get back into our community because they're driving an hour, hour and a half in and out of work. So that project is in the works. It should start to cash flow at about 8 years. And at that time, we will get 25% of the proceeds back to the community foundation for our housing fund, which after 44 years should give us about 50 million that has been put in that fund that we will turn around and put back into housing. So that's kind of where we started. But then we realized in a short period of time that there were other pieces that were missing. And one of them was a hub housing organization for the community. So we hired consultants. We actually merged 2 housing organizations into one, which almost feels like that can never happen, but it actually worked this time. They will be launching next week, where besides the consultants, we put $200,000 at the table for them to hire staff to kind of get this thing going. But they will be the policy arm. They will work with developers, they will work with landowners, and they will work with those who are looking for housing. So it's all kind of wrapped up into one organization for us. That led us then to the third piece, which is creating this housing impact fund. So when the housing hub is dealing with developers who need those early dollars in the beginning to do developments for, once they have their land, it's for the architectural design, it's permitted, it's zoning, it's all of those pieces. We're going to move to loans. $20 million we're raising for that fund. We've got about $5 million in the fund right now. So we're actually getting ready to start our first process of looking for developers that we want to work with. But it will be short term, 1 to 3 million, quick in, hopefully quick out, hopefully, but we haven't done it yet. So the key right now was to raise money and get it in the fund. So it kind of led us from this project kind of into these other areas that we found we needed for our community.
Great. Chris, talk a little bit about your fund and how things got started there.
Yeah, so as I said, we really started with convenings in 2017, and what we heard from those convenings was, developers, we need really free money or cheap money to make affordable housing work. Like the numbers just won't work. Land costs are too high, building costs are too high. And so we started looking at a gap financing fund held outside of government, but then one that we could partner with local governments. And so our housing trust fund started with $5 million from a private foundation. We use that to go to Rapid City, our biggest municipality here in the Black Hills, and say, you need to match that $5 million, and then we can get the fund started with 10. We've added another 5 to the Rapid City Strategic Housing Trust Fund through donations from corporations, donations from private foundation. We actually have a PRI in there that we're getting a very low interest loan. So that grew to about $15 million. And then just 2 weeks ago, we got some really great news that we put a congressionally directed spending request forward in this last bill, and are receiving $30 million to spread this model all across the Black Hills. So all of these smaller rural communities can have a housing trust fund, just like we have here in Rapid City, that can provide gap financing for below market development.
So just to digress for a quick minute, I think both Eileen and Chris, you had to then establish some really strong partnerships with the local government to do this. And you're stepping in to do something that makes it easier for the developers. So talk a little bit about that. Seems like something new for community foundations.
Yeah, in Western South Dakota, we're a pretty rural, conservative area. And so really the idea of holding this outside of government was something that even the government people thought was a good idea. We could be more agile, we could approve these projects more quickly, get that money out the door, and then, be a little bit more flexible on the terms that developers needed. So we really have in city and county government officials sit on our advisory boards. Those make recommendations to our full community foundation board for the loans. So those are vetted at the local level first, or at the local advisory level first, and then they go to the full community foundation board for approval.
Got it. So they are playing a role on those local committees. Eileen, would you add anything to that?
No, we have a local committee that the county runs called AHAC here, and our staff are involved in those meetings, and we're working with many people who are on that committee. I'm trying to keep ours far away from government as I can so far, because they're just not, this was such new ground for them to have a public-private partnership and do this kind of work together. It has been more than a struggle. We're all learning, but I'm trying to keep ours right this second anyway. There's only 4 million in it, so we're going to do our first project without too much government intervention, but that may change over time.
Okay, Nicole, I didn't mean to leave you out. So talk a little bit about what is going on in San Diego and what was the impetus for getting this going and the different funding sources.
Oh, wonderful. I can start. We started a little bit with a project and a little bit with funding. So the foundation was fantastic and very early on dedicating $20 million to the Housing Investment Fund from Endowment Investments. So we had that allocation, and we're in the process of fundraising for from third parties. Our target, we've designed our fund as an evergreen investment fund. So this is going to be, it's not closed ended, perpetually fundraising, perpetually open, so we can continue to reinvest in the community. And so we're planning to do our first closing during the summer, targeting $100 to $150 million raise for that. At the same time, so we're kind of building and flying. And the building part is we have a partnership with MTS, which is our transit authority here. And we entered into a collaboration agreement with them to redevelop a site that really needed activation in a downtown neighborhood called East Village. That site ideally can accommodate anywhere from 300 to 600 units. We are hoping that it'll be a mix of incomes. There we're using a lot of the market rate incomes in other projects that we're investing in and looking at to subsidize the low and middle incomes. So it's a combination in terms of financing from land that is contributed at low to no cost through long-term ground leases primarily. So in the case of MTS, that's how the land cost is moving, out of it. And then, of course, our lower rate of return on our capital being kind of a philanthropic rate. We're targeting about 50% of traditional opportunistic equity returns. That really helps the financing for our development partners. And then the third piece is that supplementing of the NOI, or the net operating income, through the market rate rents, so that we can expand the low income, middle income housing opportunities. So that was the first project that we really entered into. Another project that we entered into very early on was gap financing. So are participating in the debt side of it a little bit for a traditional low-income housing tax credit deal that was for very low-income seniors, but just couldn't get the shovel in the ground because they needed those last dollars. And so we filled that need. So I can talk a little bit more about our deals as we go on, but we're very much a kind of rapid iteration approach, an adaptable approach, where we're putting as much money to work focused on the problem, knowing that the conditions are going to change, so the solution isn't always going to be the same, given the change in market and the change in players at any given time.
So Nicole, about how many projects do you have going on right now?
So
I'm sort of afraid to ask that.
I have committed investments in 3 projects already, hoping to close a 4th one within the next couple of weeks here, and have a very robust pipeline, because the need is great. I mean, there are a lot of shovel-ready projects, so they have permitting, all the designs, everything is ready, but they just don't have the financing. And so we're really picking and choosing strategically where we can be a real catalyst in the community to help these developments get out of the ground. So for us, that means in locations where it might be a ripple effect. So it can start, other players to come and continue and to actually start the projects that are on the boards. In other locations, it might be in high resource areas where there's great adjacency to opportunities, but there isn't the lower income or middle income housing in those areas. So those are kind of our 2 approaches in terms of deal evaluation.
Makes sense. So those 4 deals represent about how many units?
So I'm adding up here. Probably close to 800, 900 units. And our goal is to do to support 1,000 units a year, at least for the next 10 years.
That's a that I feel like that gives us some framework. So you kind of have to scale up to that. You know, start with one, maybe add another, and then your goal is to get to 1,000 and then be able to sustain that. That's really helpful. Okay, kind of building on our talking about working with the city government, talk about some other partnerships with local governments, businesses. Eileen mentioned getting 2 nonprofits together to merge to be that front housing organization. What are some of the traditional partners you've identified, and maybe some surprise or non-traditional partners that have come through this? And let's start with Phil, because he has this more from a public policy perspective. So he may have some unusual friends and advocates as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start by talking about our work in eviction. When we think about affordable housing, we're also thinking about how do we keep people in their homes, with landlords being less and less willing to take Section 8 and subsidies. We know that once folks are evicted from their home, it's harder to get them established and stable in homes. So, about 5 years ago or so, we brought in Matthew Desmond, author of Evicted, to talk about his work. And it was really clear to us that we had skyrocketing rates of eviction in Pittsburgh, and trouble getting those folks relocated into stable housing. We did 2 things after that. One, of course, did a study of our own to sort of figure out how bad is the issue, and how can we help. And that study is published on our website. And the second piece that we did was we established convened a group of folks to really focus on this issue of eviction. So for the last 5 years, we've been convening this group every other week to look at eviction data, to think about solutions that we need to bring to the table. And when we think about unlikely partners, there are just so many people that we have around that table. It's not just our housing advocates. But it's elected officials that are around that table. It's people from the court system. It's even businesses that are there. So we've got this really diverse group that really identifies this as a problem and is able to come up with systemic solutions, both regulatory as well as legislative and administrative at all levels. And that really paid off when the pandemic hit. We were ready and positioned and had the infrastructure in place to be able to accept the state rental assistance dollars. And we were arguably the fastest county in Pennsylvania to get those funds up and running and out the door. We're able to then document that and think about sort of what's next, as we had a brand new county executive, met with the county executive to sort of figure out what is that new structure so that we can take the lessons that we learned and keep them in place and build upon the successes that we've had. And now we're ready to take on legislation. So there is legislation that is being introduced next week maybe, by Representative Smith Waddell out of Lancaster, and Senator Costa out of Allegheny County, to really think about sealing eviction filings. Because in Pennsylvania, once an eviction filing is filed, it's on that person's record forever. And so thinking about how can we start to really change legislation at the state level to do that type of work.
That's excellent. Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about some of your partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. So much like Phil, we talk with legislators a lot, talk with city staff a lot, and county government folks. Because of what we were focusing on, and that was really 30 to 80% AMI, we talked a lot about workforce housing and really the need for individuals in our service industry, our nurses, our school teachers to have affordable housing. And so we found really great partnerships with businesses. We heard time and time again that, we just can't get workers, or somebody will accept a job and then they'll try to look for housing here and they can't find it. And so they got to rescind. We talked to a small community of about 4,000 people, their hospital there. A quarter of the people that accept accepted jobs then decline those jobs because of housing. And so it was this huge need. And really, because of what we were focusing on, they saw value in the work we were doing and being a part of it, both as, looking for advice in that area, but also donations into the Housing Trust Fund.
Great. Go ahead, Nicole.
Just to add, reiterating first, same thing with our corporations and just different business owners in terms of the governmental level. It's really been a lot of coordination between city, county, and state in ways that haven't been done before. But then I mentioned two other things as well that seem critical for us. One is the reason why we're all here, right? Which is the philanthropic community that traditionally has been involved at a very grant level, which has been critical. But we see this group of stakeholders who have a lot of alignment with our mission, are fairly sophisticated as a whole, and so they can understand the approaches that we're coming and can move along to this kind of hybrid approach where it is more an investment. Putting their money to work in these kind of new creative and directed ways has been really exciting and fantastic. And this is individual philanthropists as well as family foundations that we're excited to work with. And then finally, the group that we haven't had the great fortune yet to work with as closely, but we see coming down the line is that we're not just trying to create housing, knowing that there are so many other services that will need to be provided in these communities. And so just the importance of the wraparound services too, from childcare to tutoring to financial literacy to transition to more stability. And so we're looking forward to partnering with some of the foundation level grantees that we've had traditionally to help to really occupy and enliven the buildings.
You know, Nicole, what makes me think of this when you're talking about the philanthropist is many of them are entrepreneurs, they're risk takers, and they've had to have investments of all kinds of interesting financing to get their businesses started or to be able to acquire other businesses. So approaching this problem or this challenge from that more entrepreneurial perspective with different models of financing, it resonates with them. It's not a foreign conversation.
Absolutely.
And I think for us as representatives of community foundations across the nation, it's what's the role that philanthropy plays in this humongous complex issue where there are federal funds, there are state funds, there are local funds, they're all complicated, they all have strings attached. And so how do we make sure that the philanthropic dollars are as impactful and effective as possible? And that's why I feel as though today's conversation is so meaningful. So Eileen, let's close the loop on partnerships. If you have any other interesting folks to add to our list.
I think in Florida, Kathleen Pasadoma really pushed a bill called Live Local, which is getting people to be able to live in the communities in which they work. So there's a lot of work going on across the state on how we implement Live Local and what does that mean for our local governments. So we've been at the table with Kathleen and others. Some donors have come forward I have never worked with before. This has been really shocking, the amount of concern people have about our workforce and where they live. So that has been really different, I think, for us in the community foundation world here in Collier County and the school district. Probably one more piece because of the amount of teachers that we have or lack of, because we are having a difficult time getting teachers here because of a $54,000 salary in a community, which is really much more expensive, but the rest of that has already been mentioned, business and whoever.
Those are all excellent. And Pasadomo is one of our state legislators, one of the leaders of the House here in Florida.
She's here in Collier County.
Yes, so. And she's been a big champion for this.
Yep.
Okay, on to our next topic. Phil touched on this, the role of advocacy, how we create advocates for a sustainable community, how the community foundations can engage policymakers and help advocate for smart policies related to growth and sustainable housing models. So we'll start with Phil and then see if anyone else has anything to add on this topic.
Thank you. I think the one of the things that was interesting to us is that back in 2019, we had grantees that came to us asking for grant funds to do some public policy work to try to increase the amount of money that was in our state affordable housing fund. It's called the FAIR Fund. You know, and at the time they wanted to raise there was a cap on that fund at $20 million. And they wanted to raise the cap of monies that would go into that fund from a realty transfer tax from $20 to $40 million. And at that time, we weren't doing a ton of public policy work. We were granting to those housing organizations that were doing that work, and they were successful in raising the cap from 20 million to 40 million. But then the problem persists, and those grantees came back to us in 2019, 2020 to say, hey, can we try this again? Can we try to raise the cap from 40 million to 100 million? But they knew at the time that we had started doing a lot more public policy work, you know, and that we had, for example, retained our own lobbyist at the foundation to help us do that work. So they asked us to join them at the table of partnership so that we could do public policy work with them. And the reason that was important is because they saw the Pittsburgh Foundation as an honest broker, that we didn't necessarily have the same type of stake in the game as an organization that was specifically created for housing, and asked us to be a part of that work. And so we worked with them, you know, over that time period during 21, 22, and sort of two wins happened. One, the state legislature looked at the work and said, you know, we're not sure we're ready to raise the cap, but at this time we're going to separate $100 million from the the ARPA funds and put it into that housing fund. So separating $100 million at that time, a single win, which was great to see. More than we could have ever done in our grant making, right? Which we thought was an important accomplishment. But then the second piece, towards the end of the year, we were able to get that legislation passed and raise the cap from 40 million to 60 million. Just to be really clear, this was not about the Pittsburgh Foundation. We were part of that partnership of our housing work, of our housing organizations statewide that did that, you know, and so we had to certainly do that in collaboration. But I also want to point out one other strategy. You know, we had also been helpful in creating the Pennsylvania Community Foundation Association. And one of the things that organization was created for is to find ways in which we can all work together through an action team construct. And so there were many times during that year when my colleagues, such as Francis Sheehan from Delaware County, who's on this call, or Kevin Murphy, who's on this call from Berks, were able to pick up the phone and call their legislator or send a letter of support to really urge, let's say, the Appropriations Committee to move it out of committee. So again, our local community foundations across the state have very close relationships with their legislators. And if we can unify those together, we're more likely to be able to push things that can get passed, and again, increase resources for affordable housing that outpace the grant making that we can produce.
All right, thanks, Phil. That was great. Eileen, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I haven't really thought much about this, but Phil, you just made me think. About 6 or 7 years ago, the chamber, the community foundation, and government kind of came to the table and said, we want to try a 1% sales tax additional in Collier County. But a piece of that sales tax was to be put in a land trust for the county to buy land to be able to do affordable housing projects, whatever that looked like. That did pass. And although we were just really off the mark, we only earmarked 20 million for that fund for the county, and we ended up raising 490 million in 5 years in a sales tax. And the reason I mention this, if any of you are dealing with additional sales tax, it's a way to generate revenues for capital projects for your counties. But, you know, to add in that housing piece is so important. And again, if we were doing it today, it would have a whole different look. We'd be saying most of it needs to go into housing. But, you know, at the time, it was the first time we had ever tried this in Collier County, and it passed by, like, I think 2 votes in the end. It was a very tiny, tiny margin. Because, you know, you're adding taxes in a state that is very red. But we were able to do it. But again, it's how government and all of us coming together to make that happen. Community Foundation played a huge role in helping push that through, which is a risk. There's no doubt, but it was the right thing to do for the community at the time.
Thanks. Nicole, how about you?
One thing that resonated that Phil mentioned is just the importance of being almost a neutral party.
Yeah.
You know, we position ourselves very much as not being competitive with anybody in the space, but hopefully complementary. And I think that gives us the opportunity to be a part of conversations that otherwise we wouldn't, and to be really an advocate for communities as a whole. So that's been very valuable. The other thing that isn't directly the housing fund, but I think I mentioned before, is that the foundation has established a think tank called the Policy and Innovation Center. And the think tank has partnerships with Turner out of UC Berkeley, with Brookings Institution, and really is focused on bringing as much housing research to San Diego County as possible. So we actually have the data to drive the solutions and to drive action. And that's been really critical in just providing that information to key decision makers. That's been a large part of our kind of advocacy work.
Yeah, I think advocacy grounded in data that's trusted and valued is a big piece of this. Chris, final word on the advocacy.
Yeah, I think you know, when we approached our senators on the federal level, we started with a really quite small ask. We have a military base here next to Rapid City that's expanding, and we were asking for $5 million. And what we heard from the senators was, think bigger. They're hearing about housing from their constituents all the time. And so it's this moment in time where community foundations can play a part in leveraging federal or state or city dollars with local philanthropy to really come forward with a neutral solution, but an innovative solution, and one that brings all the partners to the table. And so I know we're hearing about it in our communities all the time, about the need for more affordable housing. Don't discount that our elected officials, our politicians, are hearing the same thing, and so they're searching for a solution.
I think Eileen's point about having already worked on another project with regard to the tax, so her organization had built some relationships, they had some credibility, so that the coming to work on this wasn't the first time. They were already recognized and, again, a valued and trusted partners. So I think that's an important takeaway for all of us to think about when we're not in times of crisis. What can we be doing to strengthen our reputation and our relationships with other organizations? So now we're getting to the nuts and the bolts. I want to talk a little bit about finances and numbers, how you put these deals together, what are some of the financing mechanisms, and who has responsibility for what. And this has to be in layman's language. So let's start with Nicole.
Great. So we can go deeper in it, but I'll keep it high level. Again, we're focused on housing production. And so it's really about development of new housing for the Housing Fund's effort, which means that there are capital requirements from the very earliest stages, from pre-development all the way through kind of continuing investment once a building has received occupancy, stabilized, and over the life. We see ourselves as long-term owners committed to not just creating, but preserving this housing. And so that participation is important to us. So let me just kind of break down how we think about removing barriers from the creation from a financing perspective. The cost of developing housing, falls into a few big buckets. Hard costs, which are the construction costs, right? And we all know what's happened with inflation and just the cost of the labor. And we want to pay living wages to the people who are working on our buildings and not exacerbating the problems. So those costs are fairly high in terms of the materials that are going into. We are doing some work in terms of housing innovation and construction innovation to try to reduce that, but we haven't been able to really move the needle that much there. The next is land cost. And I already mentioned before that we're forming strategic partnerships, not just with government and quasi-governmental institution, but also other nonprofit institutions that are private nonprofits that might be land rich, but expertise and resource poor. And so we can really form these key partnerships where we can have alignment and meeting the needs of our community with housing by them contributing their land and us finding development partners and contributing our equity in order to make these projects work. And then the last little piece of it is is soft costs. And those soft costs, I look in two buckets. One in terms of the time to market. So all of the other things, architecture, the engineering, but it's a lot of the interest on the architecture, the engineering, and the time for permitting. And it's working with our partners there to reduce those hurdles. And then from the financing costs, reducing the cost of our equity, because we're bringing these philanthropically minded investors that don't want to maximize profit. It's optimizing return on balance within the community. And then, of course, I mentioned subsidizing it through market rate. So that gives you a little bit of piece of the, how the pieces are starting to come together for us in terms of being able to activate. We also are partnering with every type of innovation thing we can do. So we're working on looking at, recycled bonds, welfare tax exemptions, property tax abatements, kind of the list goes on. And not to want to get too technical in it, but we're really employing as much credit enhancements from non-traditional partners to bring down that cost so we can produce as much housing as possible.
Excellent. I know here in Fort Lauderdale, we're having conversations with our school district and our hospital districts. Both of those hold extensive land in different states of use. And so they're interested in doing some housing as well. So I've heard those as maybe two good places for people to start the conversation. Chris, do you want to tackle a little bit on your project and how it's structured and where the dollars are coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Rapid City Strategic Housing Trust Fund has 6 loan commitments now. We're really focused on new development of multifamily housing, 30 to 80% of AMI, that's area median income. In Rapid City, that's people making between about $20,000 to $50,000 a year. So that's kind of our target area. Housing is a spectrum, of course, and we need housing throughout the entire spectrum, but this is where we felt like we could move the needle. So we've given or committed 6 loans now. Those 6 loans will create 550 housing units. It's about 1,050 bedrooms. So we expect, 15 to 2,000 people that those 6 loans will help house affordably. It's a gap financing fund, and so we're about 5 to 10% of the capital stack of a project, really just coming in on the back end on what do you need to make the project go. As Nicole was saying, some of these are shovel ready, they're ready to go, and they just can't make the numbers pencil. Well, if we give them a low interest loan of, say, 2% interest only for a number of years, and then a balloon payment at the end, things get, a lot, that's pretty competitive terms right now. And so then they can make those projects work. We've really had a lot of success partnering with LIHTC projects, low income housing tax credit projects. And so they go out, get their LIHTC partners, get their equity from that. They maybe get a TIF from the city, and then we're coming in at just that really small sliver. The 6 loans we've given out have really varied in size and ranges. Our smallest loan is $175,000 for 2 4-bedroom townhomes for a nonprofit that is serving disabled adults. And then our largest loan is $3 million. That's for a 252 unit apartment complex that also has a solar array on it, and a quarter of those units are for seniors. So really diverse mix of loans that we've given out.
Oh, that's excellent. Eileen, you want to talk a little bit more specifics on and I know you're starting on a second deal too, we're correct?
Well, the first project, that public-private with the county will continue to own the land. The nonprofit developer will build the units on there. That's where our 10 million went in. It went in as a grant. And then this other deal with getting 25% back once it starts to cash flow, kind of came into this. At the time, I was like, I just didn't want a nonprofit developer getting rich off this project because it was philanthropic dollars. So that actually is going to work really, I think, well for us to get those funds back and then continue to put that in the Housing Impact Fund. So I think that's working really well. Part of that project, the 254 essential employees, there will also be 120 units for veterans and seniors. We have a high veteran homeless population, senior women living in their cars. So it's a drop in the bucket again, both of these projects, but it's a little drop, right? The housing impact, actually, we spend time with Chris's staff, so feel free to call Chris on this, but we haven't done a loan yet. But we think it'll be 2 to 3% interest. It will be gap financing. I know he's out much longer in loans than I want us to be out. I'm kind of hoping like our loans are going to come back really quickly so we can, move this money faster. But since we are just tiptoeing into getting applications filled out by developers, I'm too early to tell at this point.
Phil, do you have anything you want to add on this topic?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I might add is, is sort of, how do we energize our donors in the work? We've been working a lot with the county has a new initiative called 500 Homes in 500 Days. It's sort of this idea of that we need to, those homes are specifically for folks that need to come out of shelter. So our issue with homeless is that we can't find affordable places to put people that are situationally homeless. Right, 80% of our homeless are situationally homeless and stuck in shelter without anywhere to go. And so the county has asked us to sort of to put together a pooled fund for flexible resources. So as they find these homes, they can come to us and immediately use some of those dollars to overcome whatever barrier is in place to get to help with the rezoning or help with whatever that barrier is to get things moving. So we've been working a lot with our corporations, with our other private foundations, with our donors, with donor advised funds to energize people to donate to a pooled fund that the county can then access. So trying to sort of play that role of flexible funds that the county might need to access to execute on that strategy.
And I think that's excellent because it's something, again, that's inspiring to donors. It's also a starting point to get them educated on the topic. And a point that you made to us last week when we were prepping was 80% of homeless people are situationally homeless. So they don't want to be long-term homeless. They had an episode in their life that may have caused them to lose their home. It might have been an eviction. It might be the rent getting raised. It may be unexpected job loss or health issue. So those folks want to get back to stable and they're used to that and they just need a little help. So I think that's an important point. While we're on this topic of nuts and bolts, I don't want to leave it without talking about time, because these projects can take a lot of time. So would any of you like to comment on the length that it's taking to bring a project to market and kind of how you've had to adjust because of that?
Yeah, I can
Go
touch
ahead,
on
Chris.
that.
Yeah,
And
perfect.
so, yeah, our housing trust fund started in 2020. It was right during COVID. And then really got going with our first loan in 2021. But we didn't see that project open up. I think it was a 41 unit apartment complex. We just saw it open up in fall of 23. And so you really have to be patient with these funds. Housing projects take a long time to get done, from the initial conversations all the way to, when people are moving in. So you're gonna have to be really patient, and then flexible as well. The other, time it takes is your staff time. It's going to take a lot of staff time to get these done. There's vetting of applications, there's meeting with developers, there's getting all the loan documents, the promissory notes, the commitment letters all done. So it's going to take a lot of time from your staff perspective. At the Community Foundation and Black Hills Area Community Foundation, we hired somebody full-time in December of 2023 that can really be the expert in this area. He has a legal background. He had spent time as the president of a title company, so a really great fit, and has a passion for affordable housing work. So that's been a really a good fit for us, and has allowed the CEO and the director of development to really help with those efforts, but not focus full time on them. Now that we're getting this congressional funding, we'll be adding a second person as well to look at HUD reporting and then the managing of the loans. So if you're going to get into this and you're going to get into it big, be ready to add some staff, certainly.
And also volunteers. It seems to me you have to have a good group of board members or advisory committee members, other folks in the community that you may not currently be connected with, to really be providing a lot of knowledge and expertise in your decision-making pipeline. Nicole, did you want to add? I'm sorry.
That was great. I think you're right. And staffing is huge. And volunteers are huge. I cannot second that or third that enough. But the other part for us is having patient capital. So patient money, but kind of impatient in terms of results. So we are not striving for perfection or having everything solved immediately. It's really how can we get as many units built so that people have homes as quickly as possible. So I love that 500 in 500 days. I think so. Exactly. So as we're evaluating different opportunities that we can participate in, one of the key criteria is how realistic is this? How well can we execute on this in an efficient way that's faster than the general market? We aren't always succeeding and evaluating that, but that is really, really important to us. We can't just be patient and let projects go along at their normal pace.
Mm-hmm. I think also for our donors, it will be a challenge because I think they're used to a quick response. We get a grant out, we've bought X number of computers or provided food or done something immediate. And this isn't like that. So in our messaging, I just speaking personally, it's very immediate about the results or impact of giving. And this is much more long-term.
This is very long-term. And
yeah.
I was going to bring that up, like there are donors, 4 years ago that gave us money on our housing project, and it's slow and going, and curveballs that we've been throwing on this piece of property many times. And so it's always going back to them saying, yeah, we're working on it, but it's going to be a while. I mean, you do have to have patience when you do this kind of work. And as new donors have been giving to the Housing Impact Fund, I mean, I'm telling them up front, this is probably 3 years because I'm just guessing, but this is not going to be something you're going to see in the next 12 months. So you got to understand how long this is going to take. And that is very hard. It's hard for donors, but it's really hard for us, staff.
I might just
our longest loan is 17 years.
I don't want
so we
mine
won't
to be
get
that
paid
long.
back for 17 years on one of them, but that's what we needed to get this project done. It was a really great project for our community. Yeah.
That's where the flexibility comes in. Phil, did you want to add something?
I was just going to add that, I think at the Pittsburgh Foundation, we certainly are putting the pieces in place to strive to get where, my friends Chris and Eileen and Nicole are, and we hope to be there someday. But that's also why we're taking a multi-pronged approach to say, well, right now, what can we do as we wait for those results, as we wait for, so our investment committee is comfortable, right? So they have the right processes in place. That all is going to take a lot of time. So in the meantime, let's continue to pursue our public policy agenda around housing and do our convening work and our research work.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Thank you. Okay. Very quickly, challenges and lessons learned. A big challenge and a big lesson learned. We're going to go fast. We'll start with Nicole.
Challenge is just probably communication at every level, right? And lessons learned is probably the same thing. Just communicating as much as you can, more frequently than you can, so people understand, because it's high stakes and people feel very emotional about it, and a lot of dollars.
Okay, Phil.
Challenges, especially in public policy work, you cannot control the environment that happens in the policy space. So, you may have everybody excited and ready to roll, and then something crazy could happen, which throws everything off. So it's hard to control the results of that environment, that work. But I would say, that the really exciting part is this idea, or the opportunities to work with lots of partners. So continue to think about who are your allies.
Great. Chris.
Yeah, I think finding kind of your niche, right? Housing is a huge conversation. You're not going to fix it all. You're probably not going to fix any of it, right? But you want to find your niche where you can affect positive change, create a tool in the toolbox that'll hopefully be there for the community for generations.
Okay, Eileen.
Yeah, I think for us, the lessons learned, we're just working with government and how slow it moves here. Just some uniqueness to Collier County that we're trying to push. But the great thing is so much of the community is behind this housing thing. It has really helped to elevate the community foundation in a lot of ways. So I guess that was the great thing. At the same time, doing great work that's going to make a difference in the long run. I mean, what else can you ask for in the community foundation world?
Okay, so final topic in our 4 minutes to go. Let's talk about data and research. And we touched on this a little earlier, how important that is. Nicole talked about it with regard to the institute at the San Diego Community Foundation that's funded partially by Brookings or in partnership with Brookings on data. So let's talk about, for each of you, with regard to the Community Foundation, what was new and important with regard to data and research embarking on housing. We'll start with Phil first.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, there's some of the research we do in-house, and some of it our housing partners have done really great research. But I think one of the things that we noticed is that there's this disconnect in which those folks that are making the laws, our elected officials, they're not informed. They need people to come to them and present the research, share the research with them, and draw the connection between the research and policy. And what needs to happen there. And so I think community foundation leaders can play a really important role as we have those trusting relationships with a lot of our elected officials to present research and to take what we know and make sure that they're informed as well.
Nicole.
I think that's a great answer. That's basically our approach to it. It's just trying to make sure that we're connecting the dots, bringing all the different parties together and sharing information.
I find lots of pockets of research, but no one puts it all together. And maybe that's a great role we can play. Eileen.
Yeah, I think when we started the needs assessment, we've done it twice. We've been able to merge all of this data along with a whole bunch of other studies that has built the case for us in this community why housing is the most important thing this community needs to deal with. And without that, I would never have been able to sell it in the community or to our board or anybody else, our donors. So it was crucial to start with the data to be able to prove the case to move us forward.
Got it. All right, Chris, you got the final word on this topic.
Yeah, the same thing. We do a needs assessment every 3 years. We're really looking at kind of the raw numbers that we need to build and kind of the gaps that are seeing. One of the things that we try to do is really do actionable items out of those needs assessment, not just data for data's sake, right? The other piece we're looking at is what are the barriers to building affordable housing? What are, how can government streamline their processes to get more projects out the door quicker?
That is an excellent point. So I think for all of us, coming back to our own communities, looking at needs, collating data, going through it, and also thinking about what are the barriers. And to Phil's point, what are some of the things we could start with immediately? So we have 2 minutes left. So I want to be sure to make a point about the importance of inclusivity as we're talking about building, rebuilding, and connecting communities. How important inclusivity is, being respectful of the people that we say we're helping. Yeah, we are, we aren't coming in and saying, here's what you need to do. We really want to hear them and involve them in the process. So I remember Nicole saying how important language matters. So final comments on affordable housing, community inclusivity, and how you're embodying that in your work. Nicole.
I don't mind starting here. So the first thing is that it does affect us all, the affordability issue at all the levels. So that's the first thing, that it's not a certain segment of a socioeconomic segment. The other thing that we're really trying to push for solutions with is that the people who are creating the housing to reflect more the people who are served as well. So trying to figure out ways to have local, BIPOC, underserved empowerment in terms of developers, and financing and investment. Although we're focused on rental, not home ownership, we do think there are ways of increasing that opportunity for wealth generation and just for more appropriate housing, because we understand the neighborhoods, if you're serving people who reflect you in all different manners.
Excellent point. Eileen.
Yeah, I think for us, a project we did not even touch on is one of our our only Black neighborhood actually in Collier County is on channels that flooded during the hurricane. And we've had a lot of money coming in from the state for us to work with those families. But it's like, we're all very careful not to step on toes. This is not our community. It's not where we live. It's where you tell us as a community what you need, as a neighborhood what you need. So I think it's really important to have those conversations in the community when you're stepping into neighborhoods and trying to say, hey, we want to fix things. It's really not. You tell us what you need.
Yes, excellent. Phil.
I just build on that by saying I think that's actually the first step, right? That it's easy for us to get down the road of planning and putting these things together and trying to think about, these big concepts of capital stacks and whatnot, right? But I think the first step has to be in community. That's our mission.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Chris, any final thoughts on inclusivity?
Yeah, I think one of the ways we talk about affordable housing is we say we want everyone to be living in affordable housing that's affordable to them, right? And what that means to the teacher down the street, to the CEO of the corporation is of course different. But right now, the teacher down the street can't be in affordable housing. They're paying too much for housing. And so we're trying to demystify the words affordable housing and not make it such a dirty word in some circles. We want everybody to be in affordable housing.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed today as much as I did. I've taken copious notes, and I know we'll be able to continue this conversation on Philanthropy Exchange. We'll be trying to do these webinars, continue to do them quarterly. If you have ideas for topics, please reach out to Melissa and suggest them so we can add them to our list. We love hearing from you, and we love getting your suggestions. So let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for your work and for helping make the Community Foundation world a little bit better. So to our panelists, once again, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Thanks.
Thank you.